He had it all. Money, success, a company worth millions. At just 23 years old, Daniel James was living the American dream. Everyone wanted to be him. Everyone wanted to be around him. But money can't buy you everything. And on one cold October night, his perfect life was about to crash. Literally. The person who saved him. A 65-year-old woman named Clara. She was driving her old pickup truck, minding her own business. She had no idea that in just a few minutes, she'd saved the life of a millionaire. And she definitely had no idea that this millionaire would fall head over heels in love with her. This sounds crazy, right? A 23-year-old falling for a 65-year-old? But sometimes love doesn't follow the rules. Sometimes it shows up when you least expect it, in the most impossible way. This is the story of Daniel and Clara. Two people from completely different worlds. Two people who found love in the wreckage of a car crash. Before we start, I want to ask you something. Do you think love has an age limit? Really think about it. Drop your answer in the comments. I'll be reading them, and trust me, by the end of this story, you might change your mind about everything you thought you knew about love. But before we go further into their story, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment letting us know where you're watching from around the world. We truly appreciate your support and love hearing from our amazing viewers. Let me tell you about Daniel first. Daniel James wasn't your typical 23-year-old. While other guys his age were playing video games or figuring out what to do with their lives, Daniel was running a tech company worth $50 million. He started coding when he was 12. By 18, he'd already sold his first app for $2 million. By 21, he was on magazine covers. Everyone called him a genius. The media loved him. Other young entrepreneurs wanted to be him. He had everything a young man could want: money, fame, respect. But here's the thing about Daniel. He was empty inside. Completely empty. See, Daniel had just gone through the worst breakup of his life. Her name was Jessica. She was beautiful, smart, everything you'd expect a millionaire's girlfriend to be. They'd been together for 2 years. Daniel thought he was going to marry her. But 3 months ago, Jessica walked out. And the reason she gave him. It still haunted him every single day. "Daniel," she said, "you're the richest man I know, but you're also the coldest. You don't feel anything. You work 16 hours a day, you never talk about your feelings, and honestly, being with you is like dating a robot." Those words cut deep. Because Daniel knew she was right. After Jessica left, Daniel couldn't eat. He couldn't sleep. He'd lie in his huge mansion, staring at the ceiling, wondering what was wrong with him. Why couldn't he connect with people? Why did success feel so lonely? His friends told him to get back out there. "Dude, you're a millionaire. You can get any girl you want." But Daniel didn't want just any girl. He wanted to feel something real. He wanted to feel human. Now let me tell you about Clara. Clara Martinez was 65 years old. She lived in a small town called Millbrook, about an hour outside the city. Clara had been a nurse for 40 years before she retired. She'd spent her whole life taking care of other people. Clara was a widow. Her husband Roberto had passed away 5 years earlier after a battle with cancer. They had been married for 38 years. Roberto was the love of her life, her best friend, her everything. When he was gone, it felt as though a part of Clara faded with him. These days, Clara lived alone in a small house with a beautiful garden. She spent her time reading romance novels, even though she didn't believe love stories like that happened in real life anymore. Not for women like her. Not at her age. Clara had 2 grown kids who lived in other states. They called her once a week, but they had their own lives, their own problems. Clara understood. She didn't want to be a burden. So Clara lived quietly. She volunteered at the local hospital sometimes. She took care of her garden. She visited her sister Maria every Sunday. It was a simple life, maybe even a lonely life, but it was hers. On the night everything changed, Clara was driving home from Maria's house. It was late, almost 11 p.m. The roads were dark and empty. Clara was thinking about Roberto, like she always did when she drove alone at night. She was thinking about how he used to make her laugh, how he used to hold her hand while they watched TV. She had no idea that just a few miles away, a young millionaire was about to change her life forever. If you've ever felt invisible, if you've ever felt like nobody sees you anymore, hit that like button. Because Clara felt that way every single day. And you're about to see why that's about to change. It was 11:15 p.m. on October 15th. Daniel was driving his red Ferrari down a winding country road. He wasn't supposed to be there. He should have been home, or at his office, or anywhere but driving aimlessly in the middle of nowhere. But Daniel couldn't think straight. He'd been working for 14 hours straight, trying to forget about Jessica, trying to forget about how empty he felt. Finally, he couldn't take it anymore. He grabbed his keys and started driving. He didn't know where he was going. He just needed to move. The problem was, Daniel was exhausted. His eyes were heavy. His hands were shaking from too much coffee and not enough sleep. He should have pulled over. He should have called someone. But Daniel didn't have anyone to call. That's when it happened. Daniel's eyes closed for just a second. Just 1 second. But at 60 miles per hour, 1 second is all it takes. When he opened his eyes, he was heading straight for a massive oak tree. He yanked the wheel to the right, but it was too late. The Ferrari hit the tree head-on. The sound was horrible, metal crushing, glass breaking, the screech of tires on asphalt. The car was badly damaged. Daniel was trapped inside, his head throbbing and his vision growing dim. He tried to move, but a sharp pain shot through his chest. Each breath felt heavier than the last. Panic set in. He didn't know if help would arrive in time. That's when he heard a voice. "Oh my God. Oh my God. Are you okay? Can you hear me?" Clara had been driving just behind Daniel when she saw the whole thing happen. She watched the red car swerve, heard the terrible crash. Without thinking, she pulled over and ran to the wreckage. What she saw made her heart stop. A young man, probably her son's age, trapped in a crushed car. His face was bruised and battered, with scratches across his skin. His eyes were open, but filled with fear and confusion. Clara's nursing instincts kicked in immediately. She'd seen accidents before, but never like this. "Honey, can you hear me?" Clara said, kneeling by the broken window. "My name is Clara. I'm a nurse. Well, I used to be a nurse. I'm going to help you, okay?" Daniel looked at her through the pain. Even in his confused state, he noticed her kind eyes. They were brown and warm, and they looked at him like he mattered. Like he was more than just some rich kid in an expensive car. "Don't try to move," Clara said gently. "I'm calling 911 right now." She dialed with shaking hands. 911? There's been a terrible car accident on Route 47, about 2 miles past the old Miller farm. A young man is trapped in his car. He's conscious but hurt bad. Please hurry. While they waited for the ambulance, Clara stayed with Daniel. She held his hand through the broken window. She kept talking to him, keeping him awake. "What's your name, honey?" she asked. "Daniel," he whispered. His voice was weak. "That's a beautiful name. Daniel, you're going to be okay. The ambulance is coming. I'm not going anywhere, okay? I'm staying right here with you." Daniel had never heard anyone talk to him like that. Not his parents, not his employees, not even Jessica. Clara's voice was so gentle, so caring. It made him feel safe in a way he'd never felt before. When the ambulance arrived, Clara rode with Daniel to the hospital. She held his hand the whole way. She told the paramedics his name, told them what she'd observed about his injuries. She acted like she'd known him his whole life. At the hospital, Clara stayed in the waiting room while Daniel went into surgery. She didn't know why she stayed. She could have gone home. She'd done her good deed for the day. But something about that young man made her want to make sure he was okay. Around 3 a.m., a doctor came out and told Clara that Daniel would be fine. Broken ribs, a concussion, some cuts and bruises, but nothing life-threatening. He'd be in the hospital for a few days, but he'd make a full recovery. Clara felt relief wash over her. She was about to leave when she had an idea. She went to the hospital gift shop and bought a small potted flower, a little yellow daisy. She wrote a note on a piece of paper. Daniel, I'm so glad you're okay. You're going to do great things in this world. I can tell. Get better soon. Clara. She left the flower and note at the nurse's station and asked them to give it to Daniel when he woke up. Then she drove home in her old pickup truck, never imagining that she'd just met the person who would change her life forever. What would you do if a stranger saved your life and then just disappeared? Would you try to find them? Would you wonder about them? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because Daniel was about to become obsessed with finding the woman who saved him. This is just the beginning, folks. Hit that like button and subscribe, because things are about to get emotional in ways you won't believe. Daniel woke up the next morning in a hospital bed, feeling like he'd been hit by a truck. Which, technically, he had been hit by a tree, but you get the idea. His head was pounding. His ribs hurt every time he breathed. But the first thing he thought about wasn't his pain. It was Clara. He remembered her voice, her gentle hands, the way she stayed with him. He remembered feeling safe for the first time in months, maybe years. A nurse came in to check on him. How are you feeling, Mr. James? Better, Daniel said. There was a woman last night. An older woman named Clara. She saved me. She rode in the ambulance with me. Is she still here? The nurse smiled. Oh, you mean the lady who left you this? She handed Daniel the little yellow daisy and the note. Daniel read Clara's words over and over again. You're going to do great things in this world. I can tell. Nobody had ever said anything like that to him. People told him he was smart, that he was successful, that he was rich. But Clara saw something else in him. She saw potential for goodness. Daniel spent the next 3 days in the hospital, and all he could think about was finding Clara. He asked every nurse, every doctor, everyone he could find. All they knew was her first name and that she used to be a nurse. When Daniel got out of the hospital, he hired a private investigator. Find me everything you can about a woman named Clara. She's about 65, used to be a nurse, lives somewhere around here. It took 2 weeks, but the investigator found her. Clara Martinez, 65 years old, retired nurse, lived at 412 Maple Street in Millbrook. Daniel drove to Millbrook the next day. His ribs were still sore, but he didn't care. He had to see her again. When he knocked on Clara's door, she nearly dropped the cup of coffee she was holding. Daniel, she said, shocked. What are you doing here? How did you find me? I had to find you, Daniel said. I had to thank you properly. You saved my life. Clara looked embarrassed. You didn't need to do that, honey. I just did what anyone would do. No, Daniel said firmly. Most people would have driven past. Most people wouldn't have stayed with me, wouldn't have ridden in the ambulance, wouldn't have left me that beautiful note. Clara invited him in for coffee. Her house was small but cozy, filled with photos of her late husband and her children. Everything was clean and organized, the way a nurse's house would be. Tell me about yourself, Clara said as she poured coffee. What do you do for work? Daniel almost laughed. Usually, when people asked what he did, he'd say he was a CEO, or an entrepreneur, or a millionaire. But sitting in Clara's kitchen, surrounded by pictures of family and love, those titles felt meaningless. I run a tech company, he said simply. But honestly, I'm not sure it makes me happy. Clara studied his face. You're too young to be so sad, she said gently. And that's when Daniel started talking. Really talking. He told Clara about Jessica, about how lonely he felt, about how success hadn't brought him the happiness he thought it would. He told her things he'd never told anyone. Clara listened without judging. She didn't give advice or try to fix him. She just listened, the way a good nurse listens to a patient. When Daniel finally stopped talking, Clara refilled his coffee cup and said, "You know what I think? I think you're looking for love in all the wrong places." "What do you mean?" Daniel asked. "You're looking for someone to complete you," Clara said. "But you can't love someone else until you love yourself first." Daniel started visiting Clara every week. Then twice a week. Then almost every day. He'd bring her flowers from his garden, or groceries, or books he thought she'd like. They'd sit on her porch and talk for hours. Clara would tell him stories about her patients, about her late husband, about her children. Daniel would tell her about his work, his dreams, his fears. Slowly, Daniel started to change. Clara taught him how to garden. She showed him how to cook simple meals. She helped him understand that success wasn't just about making money, it was about making a difference. And Clara started to change too. For the first time since losing Roberto, she had someone to care for again. Someone who truly needed her. Daniel made her feel valued, needed, alive in a way she hadn't felt in years. The neighbors started to notice. Mrs. Henderson next door saw the young man in the expensive car visiting Clara every day. She whispered to Mrs. Johnson at the grocery store, "That Martinez woman has a young man visiting her all the time. Looks like he could be her grandson, but they're not related." Clara heard the whispers. She saw the looks. One day, she confronted Daniel about it. "People are talking," she said as they worked in her garden together. "They think it's strange that you spend so much time here." Daniel looked up from the tomato plants he was watering. "Do you care what they think?" "I'm old enough to be your mother," Clara said quietly. "Maybe even your grandmother." "So," Daniel said, "you're the best friend I've ever had. You're the only person who's ever really listened to me. Why should I care what a bunch of strangers think?" But Clara did care. She'd lived in Millbrook her whole life. These people were her community. She didn't want to be the subject of gossip. Meanwhile, Daniel's business partners were starting to worry too. They'd heard rumors that their young CEO was spending all his time with some old woman in a small town. Daniel, his business partner Marcus, said during a meeting, "People are starting to talk. This doesn't look good for the company image." "What are you talking about?" Daniel asked. "This woman you've been seeing. People are saying you're dating some old lady. It's weird, man. It's not a good look for a tech CEO." Daniel felt his anger rising. First of all, Clara is not some old lady. She's an amazing woman who saved my life. Second, I'm not dating her. She's my friend. And third, what I do in my personal life is none of your business. But the damage was done. Daniel realized that his two worlds, his successful business life and his peaceful life with Clara, were about to collide. And that collision was going to change everything. If you've ever been torn between your heart and your fears, between what you want and what others expect, leave a heart emoji in the comments. Because Daniel and Clara were about to face the biggest test of their friendship, and it was going to break both their hearts. 3 months after the accident, Daniel's life had completely changed. He was still running his company, but now he left the office at 5 p.m. every day. He'd drive straight to Millbrook to see Clara. They'd cook dinner together, watch old movies, or just sit on the porch and talk. Daniel had never been happier. Clara had taught him what it meant to slow down, to appreciate simple things, to actually live life instead of just working through it. But happiness doesn't last long when you're in the public eye. It started with a photo. Some guy with a camera phone took a picture of Daniel and Clara at the local farmer's market. Daniel was helping Clara carry her bags, and they were both laughing about something. It looked innocent enough. But when that photo hit the internet, everything exploded. The headline read, "Tech Millionaire's Shocking Love Affair with 65-Year-Old Woman." Within hours, the story was everywhere. Social media went crazy. People were calling Daniel sick, weird, a gold digger. They were saying Clara was a manipulative old woman taking advantage of a young man. The comments were brutal. "This is disgusting. She's old enough to be his grandmother. What kind of sick relationship is this? She's obviously using him for his money. This kid needs therapy, not a girlfriend." But the worst part. The photo made it look like they were a couple. Daniel had his arm around Clara's shoulders, and they were both smiling. To anyone who didn't know them, it looked romantic. The media storm was like nothing Daniel had ever experienced. Reporters showed up at Clara's house. They knocked on her door at all hours, asking invasive questions. "Ms. Martinez, how long have you been in a relationship with Daniel James? What's it like dating a man young enough to be your grandson? Are you planning to marry him for his money?" Clara was horrified. She'd never dealt with anything like this. She stopped answering her door. She closed her curtains and hid in her house. Daniel's company was in crisis mode. His investors were threatening to pull out. The board of directors called an emergency meeting. "Daniel," said the chairman, Mr. Peterson, "you need to make a statement. This scandal is affecting our stock price. Our clients are starting to ask questions." "What kind of statement?" Daniel asked, even though he already knew what they wanted. "You need to deny the relationship. Say you're just friends. Better yet, say you barely know the woman." Daniel's business partner Marcus jumped in. "Come on, Daniel. This is your career we're talking about. Your whole future. You can't throw it all away for some old woman." "Don't call her that," Daniel said, his voice getting dangerous. "Call her what? Old. She is old, Daniel. This whole thing is crazy. Just make the statement and move on." Daniel looked around the conference room. These were men he'd worked with for years. Men he'd trusted with his business, his dreams, his future. And they were asking him to betray the person who'd saved his life. "I'm not making any statement," Daniel said firmly. "Then we will," Mr. Peterson said. "Daniel, if you don't handle this, we will. We'll say you're taking a leave of absence for personal reasons. We'll distance the company from this scandal." That night, Daniel drove to Clara's house. The reporters had finally left, but he could see the damage they'd done. Clara's beautiful garden was trampled. Someone had thrown eggs at her windows. When Clara opened the door, Daniel's heart broke. She looked exhausted, defeated. She'd been crying. "Clara, I'm so sorry," Daniel said, trying to hug her. But Clara stepped back. "You need to leave," she said quietly. "What?" "No, Clara, we can get through this. I'll hire security, Daniel, stop." Clara's voice was firm now. "Look what this has done. Look at my house. My neighbors won't even look at me. Mrs. Henderson crossed the street yesterday to avoid talking to me. I don't care about your neighbors." Daniel said desperately. "Well, I do." Clara shot back. "This is my home. These are my people. I've lived here for 40 years. I can't become the town scandal." Daniel felt panic rising in his chest. "So what are you saying?" Clara took a deep breath. "I'm saying this has to stop. You need to go back to your life, and I need to go back to mine." "My life was empty before I met you," Daniel said, his voice breaking. "And my life was peaceful before I met you," Clara replied, tears in her eyes. They stood there for a moment, both crying, both knowing this was goodbye. "I need to tell you something," Daniel said suddenly. "Something I've never told anyone." Clara looked at him, waiting. "The night of the accident. I wasn't just driving around aimlessly. I was thinking about ending it all. About ending my life." Clara's hand flew to her mouth. "Daniel, no. I had pills in my car. I was going to find a quiet place and just stop. I couldn't handle feeling so empty anymore. But then I crashed, and you found me, and for the first time in my life, someone looked at me like I mattered. Not my money, not my success. Just me. Clara was crying harder now. Oh, Daniel. You saved me in every way a person can be saved, Daniel continued. And now you're asking me to return to the life that nearly broke me. Clara couldn't speak. She just stood there, tears streaming down her face. But I'll do it, Daniel said finally. If that's what you want, I'll leave. I'll never bother you again. He turned and walked away, leaving Clara standing in her doorway, watching the best thing that had ever happened to her drive away. What would you do if the person you cared about most told you they had given up on life the day you met them? How do you walk away from someone who says you gave them a reason to keep going? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because this story is about to get even more heartbreaking. If this twist shocked you, smash that like button and subscribe, because the real pain is just beginning. After Daniel left that night, Clara didn't sleep. She sat in her kitchen, staring at the little yellow daisy she'd given him months ago. He'd brought it back to her, kept it alive all this time. Now it sat on her windowsill, a reminder of the night she'd saved a stranger's life. She couldn't stop thinking about what Daniel had confessed, that he had nearly given up on everything the night of the accident, and that she had saved him in every way a person could be saved. How do you walk away from someone like that? But Clara had made her choice. She'd lived in Millbrook for 65 years. This was her home, her community. She couldn't become the town scandal. She couldn't handle the whispers, the stares, the judgment. For the next 2 weeks, Clara tried to go back to her normal life. She went to the grocery store, tended her garden, visited her sister Maria. But everywhere she went, people stared. They whispered behind her back. There's the woman who was dating that young millionaire. I heard she was trying to get his money. Disgusting, if you ask me. A woman her age should know better. Clara felt like she was suffocating. She'd spent her whole life helping people, caring for others, being a good neighbor. Now she was the subject of gossip and judgment. Meanwhile, Daniel had disappeared. After leaving Clara's house that night, Daniel drove straight to his company. He cleaned out his office, wrote a resignation letter, and left it on his desk. Then he got in his car and drove. He didn't tell anyone where he was going. He turned off his phone, left his credit cards at home, and took only cash. He rented a small cabin in the mountains, hours away from the city, hours away from Millbrook, hours away from everything. Daniel's disappearance made the news even worse. Headlines screamed, "Millionaire CEO missing after love scandal," and "Young tech genius vanishes, police investigating." His business partners were frantic. His investors were pulling out. His company's stock price crashed. But Daniel didn't know any of this. He was sitting in a cabin in the woods, completely cut off from the world, trying to figure out how to live without Clara. He'd brought one thing with him, a photo of Clara from her garden. She was smiling, holding a tomato they'd grown together. Her face was dirt-smudged and happy. She looked beautiful. Daniel stared at that photo for hours every day. He'd never felt pain like this. When Jessica left him, he'd been hurt and confused. But this felt like dying. Back in Millbrook, Clara was going through her own hell. She kept seeing Daniel's face, hearing his voice telling her she'd saved his life. She thought about him alone somewhere, hurting, maybe even thinking about ending his life again. One day, Maria came to visit. Clara's sister took one look at her and knew something was wrong. "Clara, you look terrible. You're not eating, you're not sleeping. What's going on?" Clara broke down and told Maria everything, about Daniel, about how he'd saved her from loneliness, and how the media had turned their lives upside down. "And now he's gone," Clara cried. "He's disappeared, and I'm afraid he might hurt himself." Maria listened quietly. Then she said, "Clara, can I ask you something? Do you love him?" The question caught Clara off guard. "Maria, he's 23. I'm 65. It's not, it can't be." "That's not what I asked." Maria said gently. Do you love him? Clara was quiet for a long moment. Then, in a whisper, she said, Yes. God help me, I do. Then why are you here? Why aren't you looking for him? Because it's wrong, Clara said. Because people will talk. Because you're scared, Maria interrupted. Clara, Roberto's been gone for 5 years. 5 years you've been alone, just going through the motions of living. Then this young man comes into your life and makes you feel alive again, and you're throwing it away because of what strangers think. Clara stared at her sister. Let me tell you something, Maria continued. I've been married to the same man for 45 years, and I've never seen the look on your face that you get when you talk about Daniel. Love doesn't follow rules, Clara. It doesn't care about age or what people think. It just is. That night, Clara couldn't stop thinking about Maria's words. She thought about Daniel somewhere out there, alone and hurting. She thought about the way he'd looked at her in the hospital, like she was the most important person in the world. She thought about the evenings they'd spent together, cooking dinner and talking about everything and nothing. She thought about how he'd made her laugh, how he'd made her feel needed again. She thought about Roberto, and what he would say if he could see her now. Roberto had always told her to follow her heart, to never let fear make her decisions. Around midnight, Clara made a decision. She got dressed, got in her truck, and drove to the place where it all began. The site of Daniel's accident. She parked by the old oak tree, now scarred from where Daniel's car had hit it. She sat in her truck and waited, even though she didn't know what she was waiting for. Hours passed. The sun started to rise. Clara was about to give up when she saw another car pull up. It was Daniel. He looked terrible. He'd lost weight, his clothes were wrinkled, and he had dark circles under his eyes. But when he saw Clara's truck, his face lit up like Christmas morning. They got out of their cars and stood facing each other, both crying, both afraid to hope. How did you know I'd be here? Daniel asked. I didn't, Clara said. I hoped. I've been coming here every morning for 2 weeks, Daniel admitted. I kept hoping you'd show up. I wrote you a letter. He pulled out a wrinkled piece of paper and handed it to Clara. With shaking hands, she read, Clara, if you still believe there's something worth saving between us, meet me where you first saved my life. I'll be there every morning at sunrise until you come. If you don't come, I'll understand. But I had to try one more time. I love you. Not because you're older, not because you're younger, but because you're you. You're the only person who's ever seen me, really seen me. Please don't let the world take that away from us. Clara looked up at Daniel, tears streaming down her face. I love you too, she whispered. They ran to each other and held on tight, both crying, both knowing that this was just the beginning of their fight for love. If you've ever walked away from someone you loved because you were scared, drop a comment below. Was it the right thing to do? And don't forget to subscribe, because this love story is far from over. Daniel and Clara held each other for what felt like hours by that old oak tree. When they finally pulled apart, they knew they had to make a choice. They could keep hiding from the world, or they could face it together. I have an idea, Daniel said, wiping tears from Clara's face. But you have to trust me. I trust you, Clara said without hesitation. Daniel had been doing a lot of thinking during his 2 weeks in the mountains. He'd realized something important. He didn't want to go back to his old life. He didn't want to be the young millionaire CEO who worked 16 hours a day and had no real relationships. He wanted to build something meaningful. Something that mattered. And he wanted to do it with Clara. I'm not going back to my company, Daniel told Clara as they sat on the hood of his car, watching the sunrise. I'm starting something new. A foundation. And I want to name it after you. Daniel, you don't have to. Yes, I do, Daniel said firmly. Clara, you saved my life. But more than that, you taught me what life is supposed to be about. You taught me that success isn't about money or fame. It's about helping people, about making a difference. Over the next month, Daniel worked harder than he'd ever worked in his life. But this time, he wasn't working for money or recognition. He was working for love. He sold his stake in his tech company for $30 million. Then he used that money to start the Clara Hope Initiative, a foundation dedicated to supporting young people struggling with mental health challenges, and creating programs that help seniors live with dignity, connection, and purpose. The foundation's first program paired young entrepreneurs with older mentors. The second program provided mental health resources for people who felt isolated and alone. The third program created community gardens where people of all ages could work together. When Daniel was ready to announce the foundation, he called a press conference. But he didn't hold it at some fancy hotel or conference center. He held it in Millbrook's town square, right in front of Clara's house. Clara didn't know what Daniel was planning. She just knew he'd asked her to wear something nice and be in her front yard at 2 p.m. on a Saturday. When Clara opened her front door that Saturday afternoon, she couldn't believe what she saw. There were news cameras, reporters, and about half the town gathered in the square. Daniel stood on a small stage, wearing a suit but looking more relaxed than she'd ever seen him. "Ladies and gentlemen," Daniel began, "6 months ago, I almost made the biggest mistake of my life. I was successful, I was rich, but I was completely empty inside. I was driving down a dark road, literally and figuratively, when I crashed into that tree over there." He pointed to the oak tree where it all began. "I wasn't sure I'd make it through that night. A part of me didn't even want to. But a 65-year-old woman named Clara Martinez pulled me out, not just from the wreckage of my car, but from the wreckage of my life." Clara felt her heart pounding as Daniel looked directly at her. "Clara taught me what it means to be human. She taught me that age is just a number, that wisdom comes from experience, and that love comes in forms you never expect. She taught me that success isn't about what you achieve, it's about who you help along the way." The crowd was listening intently. Even the reporters had stopped shuffling around. "That's why I'm here today to announce the Clara Hope Initiative," Daniel continued. "A foundation dedicated to bridging generations, supporting the mental well-being of young people, and helping seniors live with dignity, purpose, and connection." The crowd applauded, but Daniel wasn't finished. "But there's something else I need to say. Something I should have said months ago, before the media circus, before the gossip, before the judgment." Daniel stepped down from the stage and walked straight to Clara's front porch. Clara's hands were shaking as he approached. "Clara Martinez," Daniel said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "you are the most amazing woman I've ever met. You're kind, you're wise, you're strong, and you see the best in people even when they can't see it in themselves." Clara was crying now, right there in front of the whole town. "I don't care that you're 65 and I'm 23, Daniel continued, his voice getting stronger. "I don't care what people say or think. I care about the fact that you make me want to be a better man. I care about the fact that when I'm with you, I'm the best version of myself." The crowd was completely silent. You could hear a pin drop. "Clara, I know this is crazy. I know people will say we're wrong, that this can't work. But I also know that life is short, and love is rare, and when you find something real, you don't let it go because of what other people think." Daniel dropped to one knee right there on Clara's front porch, in front of all the cameras, all the reporters, all the neighbors who had been whispering about them for months. He pulled out a ring. It wasn't huge or flashy. It was simple and elegant, with a small diamond surrounded by yellow stones that matched the daisy Clara had given him that first night. "Clara Martinez," Daniel said, his voice shaking with emotion. "Will you marry me?" The crowd gasped. Camera flashes went off. Clara put her hands over her mouth, tears streaming down her face. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Then Clara looked out at all the faces staring at her. She saw Mrs. Henderson, who had been crossing the street to avoid her. She saw the reporters who had called her a gold digger. She saw the neighbors who had whispered behind her back. But she also saw Maria, her sister, giving her an encouraging nod. She saw some of the nurses from the hospital where she used to work, smiling and crying. She saw young people in the crowd, looking at Daniel and Clara like they were witnessing something magical. Most importantly, she saw Daniel. This beautiful, broken young man who had somehow found healing in her arms. This millionaire who had given up everything to start a foundation in her name. This person who loved her not despite her age, but because of everything she was. Yes, Clara said, so quietly that only Daniel could hear her. I'm sorry, what? Daniel said, his heart pounding. Clara took a deep breath and said, louder this time, yes, Daniel James. I will marry you. The crowd erupted. People were cheering, crying, clapping. Even some of the reporters were wiping their eyes. Daniel slipped the ring onto Clara's finger and kissed her right there on the porch, in front of God and everybody. It was the kind of kiss you see in movies, the kind that makes you believe in love again. When they broke apart, Daniel whispered in Clara's ear, "Are you ready for this? Are you ready for the world to know we're together?" Clara looked into his eyes and said, "I've been ready my whole life. I just didn't know it until I met you." Do you believe everyone deserves a second chance at love, no matter their age? Drop a comment with your thoughts. And hit that notification bell, because the ending of this story is going to make you cry happy tears. 1 year later, Clara and Daniel were married in the same town square where he'd proposed. It wasn't a huge wedding, but it was perfect. Maria walked Clara down the aisle. Daniel's business partner Marcus, who had initially opposed their relationship, served as his best man after seeing how happy Clara made Daniel. The whole town of Millbrook was there, including Mrs. Henderson, who had become one of Clara and Daniel's biggest supporters after seeing the work their foundation was doing. But this isn't really a story about a wedding. It's a story about what happened after. Daniel and Clara bought a ranch just outside Millbrook. It wasn't fancy or huge, but it had plenty of space for the work they wanted to do. They turned it into a retreat center for their foundation. Every month, they hosted weekends where young entrepreneurs came to learn from older mentors. They created support groups for people dealing with depression and loneliness. They built community gardens where teenagers worked alongside seniors, learning from each other. The Clara Hope Initiative became one of the most successful foundations in the country. But more than that, it became a symbol of hope for people who felt like they didn't fit in, like they were too old or too young or too different. Clara became the face of the foundation. She gave speeches at conferences, telling her story of finding love at 65. She showed people that life doesn't end at any particular age, that there's always time for new chapters, new dreams, new love. Daniel learned to slow down, to appreciate simple moments. He still worked hard, but now he worked with purpose. Every morning, he and Clara would have coffee on their porch, watching the sunrise and planning their day. Every evening, they'd cook dinner together and talk about the people they'd helped. 3 years after their wedding, Clara got a call that changed everything. It was from a woman named Sarah, a 70-year-old widow from California. "Mrs. James," Sarah said, "I saw your story on the news. I wanted to thank you." "Thank me for what, honey?" Clara asked. "For showing me that it's not too late. I'm 70 years old, and I thought my life had ended when I lost my husband. But your story helped me see that maybe there's still a chance for happiness again." Sarah went on to explain that she'd started volunteering at a local community center, where she'd met a 68-year-old man named Frank who had also lost his spouse. They'd become friends, then something more. "We're getting married next month," Sarah said, laughing through her tears. "And it's all because you showed me that love doesn't have an expiration date." That phone call was the first of hundreds. People from all over the world reached out to Clara and Daniel, sharing their own stories of unexpected love, second chances, and the courage to follow their hearts despite what others might think. Clara kept every letter, every email, every message. She had a whole room in their house dedicated to these stories. She called it her hope room. One evening, as Clara was reading through some of the letters, Daniel found her crying. "What's wrong?" he asked, sitting beside her. "Nothing's wrong," Clara said, wiping her eyes. "I'm just grateful. Daniel, when I was sitting alone in my house after losing Roberto, I truly believed my story had ended. I thought the best parts of my life were already behind me. She held up one of the letters. This is from a 58-year-old man who found love with a 35-year-old woman after seeing our story. This one is from a 40-year-old woman who married a 72-year-old man. This one is from two teenagers who said our story taught them that real love is about the person's heart, not their age or appearance. Daniel smiled and pulled Clara close. You know what I learned from all this? What? I learned that when you save someone's life, they don't just owe you a debt. They owe it to the world to pay it forward. You saved me that night on the road, but we've saved each other every day since. Clara looked at her husband. Yes, her husband, even though some people still couldn't believe it, and marveled at how much their lives had changed. I used to read romance novels, Clara said, and think that stories like that only happen to other people. Young people. Beautiful people. Not to 65-year-old widows in small towns. And now? Daniel asked. Now I know that the best love stories are the ones nobody sees coming. The ones that break all the rules. The ones that make people stop and think, maybe I've been wrong about love this whole time. As they sat together on their porch, watching another sunset, Clara thought about all the people who had told them their love was wrong, impossible, scandalous. Some of those people had come around, had seen the joy and purpose their relationship brought to both of them. Others never would. But Clara had learned something important. You can't live your life for other people's approval. You can't let fear of judgment keep you from love, from happiness, from being true to yourself. Daniel, Clara said suddenly, do you ever regret it? The scandal, the media attention, giving up your old life. Daniel was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then he said, Clara, before I met you, I had everything the world said I should want. Money, success, recognition. But I was dying inside. I was literally planning to end my life. He took her hand, the same hand that had held his through the broken car window that night. You didn't just save me from that car crash. You saved me from a life of emptiness. You taught me what it means to love and be loved. You showed me that real wealth isn't about what you have, it's about who you share it with. Daniel paused, looking out at the community garden where teenagers and seniors were working together, laughing and learning from each other. So no, I don't regret any of it. Every scandal, every headline, every person who said we were wrong, it was all worth it to find you. And if our story helps even one person find their own unexpected love, then it's all been worth it twice over. Clara smiled and squeezed Daniel's hand. She thought about that scared, lonely young man who had crashed into her life. Literally, and how he'd become this confident, purposeful man who changed lives every day. She thought about herself, too. The quiet widow who had thought her best days were behind her, who now traveled the country speaking about love and second chances. You know what the moral of our story is? Clara asked. Tell me. Love isn't about age. It isn't about what other people think or expect. Love is about finding someone who sees you, really sees you, and chooses to stay. It's about two people making each other better, making each other whole. Clara looked directly into the camera, as if she could see every person who would hear this story. If you're out there thinking it's too late for love, that you're too old or too young or too different, I want you to remember something. I was 65 years old when I found the love of my life. He was 23. We shouldn't have worked on paper, but love doesn't read paper. Love reads hearts. Sometimes love finds you in the wreckage, Daniel added. Sometimes it comes disguised as a stranger who stops to help. Sometimes it shows up when you least expect it, in the most impossible package. And sometimes, Clara finished, the best chapter of your life is the one you never saw coming. As the sun set behind them, Clara and Daniel sat in comfortable silence, grateful for the crash that had brought them together, grateful for the courage to love despite the odds, and grateful for every day they had together. Because in the end, this isn't just a story about a 65-year-old woman and a 23-year-old man who fell in love. It's a story about hope. It's a story about second chances. It's a story about the power of love to heal, to transform, and to prove that the best things in life come when you least expect them. If you made it this far, you're clearly someone who believes in the power of love to change everything. Hit that like button if this story touched your heart. Subscribe if you want more stories that challenge everything you thought you knew about love. And drop a comment telling us about a time when love surprised you, because we love reading your stories as much as you love hearing ours.